10 years ago, a young inventor was struggling to gain acceptance for a device that nobody wanted to back. It was a coin-operated game with a video display. He took it to a local bar in Sunnyvale, California, for a kind of consumer test to see how reliable the machinery would be. After a day and a half, they told him it was broken. But how?
The machine had completely filled with quarters and would take no more, and the quarters had backed up through the coin mechanism. So we felt that that was a problem that we would be willing to solve, and we solved that by just putting a much larger coin box in the machine.
In fact, it was a huge success. All he needed was a name for it.
And that was called Pong, which incidentally in England was manufactured under the name Ping for the reasons that evidently Pong is not a good word in England. I don't know if I should.
Nolan Bushnell and his personal enterprises have gone from strength to strength, as we'll later see. In less than 10 years, a whole new industry has arrived. And it all depends on computer graphics. This kind is called vector scan. The electron beam moves directly from place to place on the screen, switched on and off by the computer's calculations. It needs to do this maybe 30 times per second. Another way of composing the image is just the same as is used in color television. This is raster scan. The picture is painted line by line. Each line is divided into basic units called pixels, individual boxes that are coded both for brightness and for color. Again, the picture changes often enough to make it flow like a film, fast enough to deceive the eye. For most people, there's something intimidating about the idea of interacting with a computer, but that is what's happening here. The computer's calculations, all those numbers, are presented in a form that feeds directly to the brain. There's a lot more to the history of computer graphics than the invention of video games. The development of the video display in today's fantasy war games echoes its origins some 30 years ago. Until then, an enemy attack was plotted manually, a technique that had been developed to track massed waves of bombers and to control the fighter squadrons sent up against them. This was not good enough now. A single hydrogen bomb could destroy a major city. So one strand in our story began here. In 1953, with the Whirlwind computer, once fed with information, it had three important functions: to calculate, remember, and report. From the start, it was conceived as having a visual display, if only in the form of a single moving dot. Today, a computer museum is the final resting place for one of Whirlwind's 2 memory cores. Every layer from its core is a mesh of wires, and each pair crossing inside a particular ferrite ring could switch its magnetism one way or the other to represent the numbers 0 or 1. Each of the cores could store around 16,000 of these bits of information. The kind of problem that Whirlwind could handle was to calculate the path of a ball that's bouncing on a table. Or a ball that falls off the edge. Or the track of an enemy bomber. The generation of computers that led to such marvels relied on memory banks that contained about as much as would now fit comfortably on one single chip. They needed more than that. They needed transistors. At first, each device was protected by a bottle. The TX series, 1955, marked a huge step forward in both memory and graphics. By the early 1960s, a way of interacting directly with the computer by using the screen itself had been invented by Ivan Sutherland. Sutherland called his system Sketchpad, A light-sensitive pen controlled a marker on the screen, which in turn could sketch in lines or break away at will. Switch to another mode and the apex is captured, and now that too can be moved. The lines appear to stagger as from moment to moment the computer recalculates each of their positions. Switch functions again. This time, erase. Sketchpad had a fairly limited capacity for vector scan display, but what it could show involved some ingenious calculations in three-dimensional space. The computer has worked out which of the lines define the surfaces at the front, and it then eliminates any line that would be hidden behind them. But they're still in the computer's memory, and they reappear as we twist the piece around. Similar computer programs have been used to control the tools for manufacturing such an object. By 1961, this mini-computer had all its works in the cabinet on the left, but its makers wanted everyone to know just how much it could remember and how fast it would run. So a student was encouraged to work out a game in which you fight another rocket or can fall into the sun. Steve Russell, the inventor, shows a new generation how his original Spacewar is won.
Spin your ship around at right angles to the line of the sun and go for about 5 seconds. Then you can turn off your rocket. Now you should be in a stable orbit. Yep. And now you can concentrate. Oh, you got done in by an asteroid.
At $120,000 for the computer alone, Space Wars could be played only in academic institutions or in industry. But it did represent one trend in the development of graphics, interaction in real time. The other main trend, improvement in the pictures, had to wait for better memory storage, not just access to information on tape or disk. That's too slow. This, an 11th generation in the same computer series, has an instantaneous random access memory. And along with that, the techniques to use it have developed. That all happened more than any other place in Utah, in Salt Lake City. This is the right place, Brigham Young told his Mormon followers as they looked down into this valley. And in the early 1970s, the right place was the University of Utah's engineering school where computer graphics flowered. Ivan Sutherland had come here to teach, but it was his graduate students who solved most of the problems in making realistic pictures entirely out of numbers. The funding came from defense. Smooth, curved surfaces, highlights, shading, textures. Each process required the development of a mathematical formula that would turn the simplest possible original description into a highly complex image. One of the later students who drew several strands together describes how they're applied to make an ornamental cup or goblet. Jim Blinn.
In the early days of computer graphics, when people were trying to figure out how to make pictures of objects at all, the first problem to be solved was how to describe an object to the computer. The simplest way to do that is just to draw it off on graph paper. This is just a cross-sectional view of one half of the object, a simple cup shape. And in order to describe this to the computer, you first number all the points going around the outside rim of the object. Once you've done this, the computer can then spin this around to make a surface of revolution and make line drawing pictures of what it would look like from different views. Here we see the sort of picture that a computer can fairly simply make of this. It's called a wireframe drawing, where all the lines are drawn irregardless of where they be seen or not. So the next problem to be solved is called hidden line elimination, where you have the computer know not only the positions of the lines, but the positions of the faces in the object, so that it only draws those lines that are not hidden by some opaque face. Now this sort of a picture looks much more realistic because it has some solidity to it. You can see where the solid objects are hiding the things behind it.
The new work at Utah really began with the production of color-shaded solid images.
Now this sort of picture is made in a different fashion than you saw the line drawings made. This is made of an array of little spots on the screen, which are called pixels.
It makes the edges jagged.
You can see here individually each pixel magnified to be a little square. The idea here is that each square has a number stuck in it, and the brighter the number, the brighter the pixel, the larger the number. And so the computer program then has to figure out what value or what number to stick in each of these little spots. The idea here is that we're going to simulate the solid object with light shining on it from a particular direction and color in some solid areas. You figure the orientation of the surface relative to the light source. If the surface is face onto the light, you make it brighter, and for surfaces that are more edge onto the light, you make them dimmer. Now this picture looks better, but it's still sort of lumpy. It's made up of a bunch of flat facets. We know it's supposed to be a perfectly smooth surface of revolution, and so the next stage of development was to make it smooth. This is about where I started working on some of the programs here. This particular program uses just some more sophisticated mathematics in order to generate perfectly smooth surfaces by coming up with a separate number for each pixel on the screen instead of having whole areas that are one solid color. In addition, this uses a somewhat better light reflection model where we're simulating not only just diffuse reflection but also highlights. The problem now is that it looks too smooth. It's mathematically perfect. So the next sort of problem to do was to add some texture or some irregularities to the surface. This is the result of that. Beforehand, we just had these 10 points going around the outside surface defining the shape of the thing which was swept around in space. Now we have to define the details of the texture pattern here. Now in this case, the picture is defined in a more complicated manner.
A surface texture and in addition a pattern that requires a further program. Here it's shown as a grid of pixels, each defined by a different number that makes it light or dark. Several such patterns are wrapped around the object by adding them to the program that describes the surface of the cup. In the graduate students' work at Utah, the solutions to aesthetic problems were complemented by a second line of research into how the surfaces of real objects could be converted into numbers. Several of the techniques were devised by Ed Catmull.
My work was to come up with a way of generating images of curved surfaces, arbitrarily curved surfaces, not just spheres and cones, but those that had general shapes to them. Mainly it meant taking a mathematical surface and dividing it into smaller and smaller pieces until it was so small that it was a simple problem.
And then, frame by frame, he could make it move. University of Utah, 1972.
One of the things about University of Utah was there was very little equipment. There was a group of students, and magic happened in that time. A lot of good ideas happened, and it just kept rolling forth.
Fred Park's talking head. The database, the information from which a picture is made, can be collected and fed into the computer in a variety of ways. At a naval training school in southern England, the source is a handful of photographs. From these are drawn the profile of a ship. Its surfaces are mapped and several hundred data points are plotted, at first in 2 dimensions and then in a third, just like the hand was. The processed image is a grey and fuzzy picture, but that's how it would look at sea, way out in the distance. It's HMS Sheffield. And this? A skilled observer should already have recognized a Russian destroyer of the Kotlin class. And in a shooting war?
Sit down and place yourselves in the chairs and I'll tell you exactly what to do. Place your arms in the armrests, grasp the bottom of the joystick control, place your thumbs alongside the blank part. The exercise that you're about to take part in is a tracking exercise. Your target will be a buccaneer coming over the low land. It will come over low, then climb, and then dive straight towards you. As soon as you see the aircraft, demand control.
There's a lot more picture than can be shown on his screen, and the trainee can move it to try and keep his target in the center. This is a tracking exercise. He's not supposed to shoot. Again, the aircraft is an accurate 3-dimensional computer model.
Freeze.
With a picture that's about as good as they'd get in the field, how well did they hold their target?
Aimer 1, 0%, Aimer 2, 44%, Aimer 3, 16%, Aimer 4, 30%. Your percentage good time is when you are within 10 feet of the target.
More sophisticated still are the graphics for a system like this. We're looping the loop in a formation of military jets. In the factory in Utah, the screens show 6 selections from the same database, all seen from slightly different angles. And on the planes in front, the light, the shading, changes as we roll. Now change the database to that for a helicopter. In hundreds of miles of simulated countryside, the pilot has chosen to land in a clearing in the forest. The computer makes the choice of how much detail the pilot will see. To land, he needs precise visual cues. In the computer, there's only one description of each kind of tree, though it may reappear in different sizes and at different places in the scene. The pilot's not concerned about any lack of realism. He's far too deeply absorbed in a very real task. But for the airline pilot, the training environment has a few further elements to feed his senses. He's physically thrown around. From Salt Lake City, the graphics come to Crawley, Surrey, where simulators are built for airlines all over the world. Inside the simulator, it feels very much indeed like flying a 747. And on the glide path ahead, that's Taipei Airport, or something remarkably like it. The boxes on the roof contain 5 television tubes from which the pictures are reflected into the cockpit windows below. Each of the windows has its own separate picture. And by another special process, the runway at night has bright points of light. Pilots not only train, but are regularly tested on routine and emergency procedures that they may never otherwise encounter. Here there'll be absolutely nothing out of the ordinary, except that he's coming into land in a cartoon image of his world. Like a rather expensive video game, this again is real-time interaction. But interaction may take other forms. Here it's to plan ahead. The manager of an oil field calls up a map of the world that he's exploiting. In this case, the bottom of the sea. Exaggerate the vertical scale. Now call up the oil wells, among which one of the platforms is due to be moved. Except that now a separate tablet is used to interact with the image, this is plainly a direct descendant of Sketchpad. This same picture system can also be used to change the design of the wing of a car, then to add a smoothing program. Back in Salt Lake City, Utah, these commercial applications by Ivan Sutherland strongly reflect his own pioneering work and that of his colleagues and students. In some 20 years' development, there's been a continual flow of new ideas. For one, full animation in 3 dimensions. And to help the eye see this action in depth, make the picture brighter at the front and darker at the back. That's called depth cueing. And again, there's only one description of one rocking horse in the computer's memory. That's all that's needed. Computer animation. Could computers ever replace the animated film? At the New York Institute of Technology, security is high because in the computer graphics lab, they hope to produce a full-length feature called The Works. It's about robots that mine the asteroid belts. That's if Disney or George Lucas doesn't get there first. Because even with all this computing power, it's going to take them years. It can take 7 minutes to compute all the detail of each individual frame, but seeing what'll work and writing all the programs will add a lot to the time. But several of the Utah pioneers found their way to New York Tech and have already developed most of the software. The basic technique, called tween, was designed to make animation easy. Ed Catmull.
We worked with conventional animators. Some of them did not adapt at all. Some of them had a very difficult time working with the computer. And a couple just plain refused. They'd pull their hair out if they weren't already bald. But there were some others who loved it.
Including Howard Spielman.
I've just animated this little piece on this tweening station. This is a light pen. It's actually an antenna which is designed to look like a pen so human beings can relate to it. And this is a digitizing tablet. And we take the animator's drawing and we put it down. And I simply draw the lines of the little drawing of this little man here.
From the tablet, the character goes directly to the screen, where details can be tidied up. The compartments must be fully enclosed because they define areas that later will be filled electronically with color. Any gap would allow it to leak. The animator now designs not the next frame, but will jump ahead to a point where the action has moved well forward. The little man will be lifting from the ground. And that's because his nose has already grown a lot. Save that stage, put it in the computer's memory.
I can also, at this point, start to turn his little feet.
This new position will be 8 frames later in the story. He could have made it less or many more. Now, the tween computer program calculates the frames in between the 2 positions and displays them on command. In hand-drawn cartoons, this was all done by an assistant, called an in-betweener, who handled all the drudgery of animation. This stage is still called a pencil test.
Now we'll put in another 6 keyframes and you'll have this little fella fly up out of the screen.
Howard Spielman hands that on to Susan Sparks, who works on what's called ink and paint. She selects the colors and fills in the outline. When every frame, including all the in-betweens, has been individually filled and checked, it looks like this. Or with a background. In 3 dimensions, the cartoon figure is replaced by a wireframe model. As they move closer to reality, that seems to change the character of what they try to do. They aim for more natural movements. But again, they just use key frames with computer in-betweens. The whole body can be moved by the operator, who concentrates now on a single limb. "3D animation, at this stage in slow motion. Now at normal speed, the solid. The promise is enormous. On the way to their full-length feature, this was just a test, a glimpse of the potential. Each finished animation is set against a background such as this, created in the computer by Paul Zander, electronic background artist for New York Tech. From a picture that full size would cover 18 television screens, he's blowing up a 1-frame section. What kind of training did he have?
Not really technical as computers work, because I have no idea what makes one run, but I've been in commercial art, advertising, and so forth, and films. It's designed by the scientists, so a layman can sit down as an artist without knowing what even makes the computer run.
The program he uses was devised by Alvy Ray Smith, who recalls Zander's arrival at New York Tech.
Been painting backgrounds in Hollywood for 20 years, and the very first time he got on the machine, he literally froze, partly because the boss was standing behind him saying, "Paint me a picture." I was pretty disappointed. It was the first time we had a computer-naive real artist come in to try out the paint program, and I thought it was fairly important that he be happy. He froze.
Ed Catmull.
He was resistant to getting on the computer, but as soon as he was forced onto it, Took about 15 minutes to adapt, and then he was sold. He was then painting backgrounds that looked just like the kind he'd been painting in the past. We didn't require him to change his style, but we let him work at 2 to 3 times his normal speed. He didn't have to clean brushes anymore.
He can turn his pen into any kind of brush, here with a stipple effect, rather like a spray gun. And he has an instant choice of colours.
Now I can select colors by taking the tip of the cursor and touching a color.
His next brush is a dot, and with that he paints a daisy. Now he tells the computer the whole flower is a brush.
Or if you needed a field full of daisies, you could do that too.
And he can save that brush for use again.
You never have to repeat yourself with a computer. Once you make something, you never have to do it twice.
He can change his colours any time he likes. He can spin through his palette. Painting by numbers can also be an end in itself. Probably the leading American practitioner, and again a computer-naive real artist, is Ed Emshweller. We invited him to try a commercial machine which uses some of Alvy Ray Smith's techniques and to paint us a picture.
This is in essence a trial, and the way I work very frequently is to make a number of different images which I can incorporate or modify or change or branch out from my original premise. All right, now I'd like to put some little flames and animate them. You can see I've added them all in this area.
He's using stages that he's saved over a couple of days of experiments. As an artist, Emshweller has worked in all kinds of media.
I find that all tools have limitations. If I work in oil painting, it's different from watercolors, different from engraving. They all make me behave differently. They all have limitations that I recognize and I work with. I achieve certain values. There are options.
He can also incorporate new material from the outside world.
Okay, here's a picture of my daughter.
He selects a colour, positions a section of Sue's photograph, and then recalls the original image.
Now this image should appear with her.
In the computer's memory, he names this Sue Key.
And then if I wanted to change a lot of these colors back here, I simply changed the color map, changed some of the values. Then I took part of her face and made that into a pattern. And then this is duplicated over the entire space going through here. It gives me a texture.
Call that Sue Cold.
That's one version, and another version, of course, would be Sue Light.
Is that it?
Yes, it is.
There is a speedier alternative, electronic visual effects manipulated in real time. Ron Hayes calls this analog computer graphics. For a tape called Odyssey, he creates startling images from almost any source of light.
I'm able to create volume and quality work at a greater rate of speed and at a more economically efficient factor than if I were to create strictly in digital animation. I can also paint with digital technology, but it takes me longer and I can't see it happening in real time as I'm doing it. I'm like any canvas artist who wants to take a brush and paint and see the stroke there immediately. I merely use the light from a light box and begin to take the raster scans, or the little tiny lines that make up the imagery on the cathode ray tube, and bend them and shape them into all kinds of different pattern shapes, motions, so that I can make them go this way, this way, this way, this way. Give them a sense of color, give them a sense of dynamic form and shape and motion, and that becomes a choreography of light.
His high rate of production gives Ron Hayes' art a good commercial edge. A block away on the same Hollywood street, the standard digital techniques seem slow by comparison. Bill Kovacs is chief programmer for a commercial production house with a reputation for good ideas. Their clients include American TV companies who want animated titles for long-running series. But most of their work is adverts for which they can provide a glossy, high-tech style. Today, he's working on an ad for a shaver.
Move it over a bit more. And turn it like this.
further, and I'll adjust that position. Now the computer is computing a new path of action for that object, and when that's done, I can play it back. And we'll read in another object, the field of hairs we were showing before. And that's not quite the composition that I'd like, so I'm going to change that a bit.
This could eventually be used in a variety of ways. It might be converted into a computer graphic solid. But in fact, the program for the movement of the shaver is not for graphics at all. That goes onto disk, which in turn will control the movements of a giant model and of the camera that'll film it. The combination of wireframe graphics and real objects, especially the product, is popular with their clients. Robert Abel.
It's very expensive to do, and it costs about $90,000 on the average to do 30 seconds worth of film.
Rather more than a whole horizon. But commercials are expensive.
Live action for the same 30 seconds can run as little as, say, $50,000. It could run as much as $150,000. So from that standpoint, we're kind of in the middle.
Abel and Kovacs are justly proud of this. It's an accurate portrait of downtown Chicago. Every point, every line has been plotted. A Chicago architectural firm, which has a special interest in the buildings in white, sent its people out to map the city in 3 dimensions, then passed the data on to Abel and Kovacs, who programmed their computer to fly through it. This looks like an expensive piece of modeling. In fact, the architects and the production house did a special deal.
It was inexpensive for both of us because it was sort of a joint venture. They were contributing the database, the model, if you will, and we were contributing our computer and our time as designers. So it was a chance to do a more complete model of a city than it's ever been done physically. So that was the challenge for us.
A far more direct commercial benefit from computer graphics comes from manufacturing it in the form of video games at maybe $3,000 a shot. This is the house that Bushnell built, and frankly, it's been doing pretty well. And although he doesn't live here anymore, so has the man whose first product improvement was to build a bigger coin box. When he sold his first business, some $15 million went to Nolan Bushnell himself. But the purchasers didn't want one small part of that huge package, so Bushnell bought it back. For the children of the Peninsula Day Care Center south of San Francisco, this is a specially popular outing.
Special surprise for you!
But what in fact they see around them is part of the continuing saga of an old American dream. How by imagination and hard work, any individual person can make a great deal of money, if enough others will lend him a hand. When the kids ask their parents to bring them back, they'll all have fun, because there's a slice for everybody in this growing international business. What do pizza and puppets and cuddly cartoon characters have to do with computers and money? Or rather, to get them in the habit, this time, free tokens. And it's not really gambling, because all they'll ever win is more time to play. That's a new twist to an old game. Nolan Bushnell spends a great deal of time just watching how it works.
I like to describe myself as a leisure time technologist. And what that really means is I like to apply technology to the process of having fun.
Bushnell, too, was at the University of Utah when he began putting 2 and 2 together to make $1 million.
I was in engineering school at the time, and we used to play games on the large $8 million computer. And my knowledge of the amusement park business at that time, because that was my summer job, I said, gee, if I could put this sort of game there and charge $0.25 for it, I believe people would play it. But then you take 25 cents and divide it into $8 million, and you decide it's not quite a financial proposition. Well, after I graduated, I worked in industry for a couple of years, and one day across my desk came basically it was an advertisement with a price to it. And the machine that was advertised was very inexpensive for the power. And I remembered back and said, well, hey, maybe 25 cents divided into the price of this machine does make sense. All the way along, the video game evolution has been cost-constrained evolution. The early games had very little memory because memory was very, very expensive. As memory has gotten more and more inexpensive, you see more and more of it used. Better detail on the pictures, more randomness, more fully developed backgrounds. Those are all memory constraints. Of course, some of the things that you have in the simulators for space programs have billions of bits of memory. And so they have some very interesting graphic richness that really will be 3 or 4 years away in an arcade system.
And his young customers?
They're learning some of the basic skills that will be necessary for them to have in the 80s and beyond.
And that still seems to include a certain amount of violence?
Well, violence is, I think, a nature of the human animal. We would like to deny our animalism, but at the same time, I think it's there. I think the most important thing is that we find ways that we can vent our hostilities in socially acceptable manners.
If you've really got the bug, you can always take the game home with you. For one enthusiast, that's a real advantage. His legs are paralyzed. And he gets little chance to play with other children. He's 8½. Since he started on video games, Chad's reflexes and motor coordination have dramatically improved. Chad's personal battle is very real. But he's growing up in a world where reality and fantasy are increasingly difficult to distinguish. Is this real? Or is it a simulation? And how real is simulation? The future of NASA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory depends on a continuing stream of research programs getting funded. And that, they believe, depends on public awareness of key projects such as this, which in turn depends on the skills of Jim Blinn.
The sort of work I do at JPL is simulation of outer space scenes, such as this one. The idea here is to make an image of what it would look like riding along with a spacecraft as it goes past the planets. Such an image requires several different types of objects and different sorts of databases involved. So the first stage of the game is acquiring all the data. You need data for the locations of the stars, need data for the rings of Saturn, how bright they are, surface features on Saturn and its moons, the shape of the spacecraft, and so forth. The picture-making process itself runs in several stages. We start out drawing all the objects in the order back to front. Draw the far-away things first and the near things last, so that they overlay each other.
The stars and moons are made a little brighter compared to the rings of Saturn and the planet itself. To be useful, a simulation may enhance reality to make the information clearer. But sometimes it's just a guess.
Some of the objects that we draw, such as the moons, we don't know what they look like initially. So we have an artist come in and paint an artist's conception of a map on the surface. Now, once the spacecraft has flown by, we have some pictures of what the thing really looks like, so we can go and enhance or improve our database. Here we see the moon Tethys, and this is what it really looks like as opposed to the artist's conception we saw before. Now, once you can draw still frames like this, the next thing we want to do is to make movies of it. So we do this by setting up a set of initial key frames, the same way as is done in conventional animation, maybe 40 or 50 of them for a 5-minute movie.
And in the next key frame, the streaks appearing in the top left represent particles in a ring seen as Voyager passes through. The streaking is called motion blur, and that too is calculated by the computer. Also, the colours are made a little stronger. That's reality as you'd see it with slightly altered senses.
You have to stretch it a little bit, even in doing purely scientifically accurate things, to make some things just show up. That just wouldn't appear, and so they would look kind of funny. And after you think about it for a while, you realize that is what it would really look like.
This view existed, but Voyager 2 never saw beyond here. An alternative reality? Computer graphics had already been used to select its path to make the best observations with all the instruments it carries. That's the field of view of its ultraviolet spectrometer. The project planners had to reconcile the sometimes conflicting needs of 11 different investigating teams.
Computer graphics is an excellent way to show what the conflicts are graphically.
With a simple example, project planner Charlie Coles.
Now you'll notice on the right side of the rings there, several of the moons coming quite close together. So we'll stop the display here. Now we'll project the field of view of one of the television cameras.
One of the 11 different programs competing for limited time.
Now that's great as far as what the imaging team would like to have. But let's suppose at the same time the ultraviolet spectrometer team of investigators really want to look somewhere else. They may want to look at the moon Titan. As Titan takes 16 days to orbit Saturn, they would like to follow it with this instrument and measure what kind of gases are being released. Well, here's a direct conflict. In this particular example, the alignment of the small moons was more unique. In other words, Titan is sort of orbiting Saturn forever. The ultraviolet team can look at a different time. And so this conflict was resolved in favor of the television camera and the small moons.
From the astronomically vast down to the world of chemical bonds that are smaller than the wavelength of light, computer graphics has the power to provide an image that feeds our human imagination. In the computer's eye view, this is an object of beauty, a stained glass window. But that's just a projection of our human minds and a human use of color. In fact, that's DNA, the molecule that contains the genetic code. There's the double helix. It's a three-dimensional map that the computer can explore as easily as it flew through the wireframe of Chicago. In fact, this is just a convenient description, a working model, one of many that's been made. At the University of California, San Francisco, Robert Langridge.
Well, previously, before we used computer graphics, we had to use these kinds of models in which you try to understand how one molecule interacts with another by just looking at them. The problem is that, as you see, they're floppy, and it's very hard to get accurate positions and accurate distances, which is what you need if you're going to do this kind of work. The other way to do it was to use these kinds of models, and these are the best of their kind for studying large and complicated molecules. You can measure the centers of the atoms quite accurately. You can rotate around the bonds, fix them in position, but the problem is that they are still very floppy, and it's difficult to do things truly accurately, whereas with the computer you can display them as you see in 3 dimensions on the screen.
In medicine, it can be used to design new drugs.
Of course, computer graphics is a very new tool in this business, and it takes quite a while for a drug to reach the stage where it can actually be used in treatment of disease. But there are a number of structures which are being looked at now.
In the center of a cave, that stick model represents the molecule of a widely used anti-cancer drug. It fits neatly into this pocket, blocking the operation of an enzyme that controls DNA synthesis. It's easy to measure the distances between the invader and the walls. Could its design, its fit to the cavity, be improved?
The main object there is to make it perhaps bind more tightly, bind more specifically, and hopefully not bind to other similar structures and cause toxicity. What you really need is what Paul Ehrlich called the magic bullet, which very specifically hits one very specific place and cures one specific disease.
Here the atoms are represented by apparently solid spheres. A real model would be flexible, and so is this. It's more than just an illustration. It's a mathematical solution, the answer to a complex problem in 3-dimensional geometry, for which, as it happens, all the computing power came as a spin-off from other quite unrelated research at California's Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. They're building a huge fusion reactor, a step towards the goal of harnessing the nuclear processes used by the sun and stars. To design such experiments, to study the physics of the violent reactions that must be contained within the reactor, is a job for the fastest, the most powerful computer in the world. The rate at which a signal can move through a computer is limited by the speed of light, so computers don't get any bigger. In fact, this central processor occupies no more space than that ancient slow coach, Whirlwind.
Half the addition here and the other half here.
For Livermore's computer graphic mathematician, Nelson Max, it's a tool he can occasionally borrow to make himself a movie. For his kind of highly detailed pictures, it can take a smaller computer an hour to produce a single frame, whereas here it would take 8 seconds. Carla's Island, an exercise in pure computer graphics. Nelson Max.
If you're going to draw a picture of something to look realistic, you have to figure out for each point on the picture what color it should be. And that means that you have to understand all the lighting conditions. It's just very complex computation for each point on the picture. So if you can compute very rapidly, you can put more details of realism in the picture.
This is one way to go. More and more realistic detail from ever more computing power. And they'd need more still for a big screen epic. In the Star Wars film empire, they've done pretty well with models and special effects. And yet, it's here at Lucasfilm in Northern California that the strongest computer graphics team has now assembled. Ed Catmull moved here, so did Avi Ray Smith, and a newcomer, Lauren Carpenter, who has found a way of persuading computers to produce random images that look surprisingly real. The teapot, made the old way, took hundreds of data points. The landscape behind it needed only 40, and a program that tells the computer to take those 40 points and use what we might call imagination. So let's forget reality. For the world of pure fantasy, this technique should save effort, computing power, and money. The computer itself can't distinguish between the products of pure imagination and accurate descriptions of the real world. But even by applying current knowledge, the computer's power should increase 1,000-fold in the next 10 or 20 years. Whatever technique is used, the simulated imaginary world of the artist or entertainer should become ever more realistic. Charlie Coles.
Now, if you can imagine carrying simulation one step further, suppose in 20 years you could purchase a cassette that you could play and your screen would light up and you could interact and live some of the great races or thrills, such as the Ben-Hur chariot race, actually driving your horses around the circus and with a lever control actually steering this team of horses. Or suppose you could hang glide over the Grand Canyon, or let's say launch a jet aircraft from an aircraft carrier, fly around and land, and yet you couldn't harm yourself. And I think that when computer memories and speeds pick up, the day will come when it would be possible to literally do that, to purchase a cassette for some great experience you've always wanted to have, and the computer will have modeled that small world for you so that you can interact with it.
Increasingly, fantasy may become part of our life's experience, while the real world of the scientist may appear ever more fantastic. In the world of some future computer, imagination and reality may blur and blend as one.